Chapter 3. At the Bottom of the Abyss. How did this happen? Mahaka Takuma, the next representative of Mahakuten, was dripping with cold sweat as he met with Masaki Kuriko. You're skipping steps too fast. Even I need time to prepare myself. This is terrible, terrible, terrible. Standing behind Takuma as his attendant, the old woman who caused this meeting was watching the scene with a broad smile. Takuma would have liked to complain to her, but he couldn't take his eyes off Kuriko. It was just like an ancient dragon in front and a demon behind. Yes, this was how Takuma felt, that she was far more frightening than tigers and wolves. This is way too much, old woman. It was a few days ago, when Takuma attended the Sanan conference dressed as a woman. Bang! While Takuma was lost in thought about Sana, and his sisters were having wild fantasies in the reception room, his former nanny suddenly burst into the room. Everyone froze upon seeing the person they least wanted to see in this situation. Imagine that Ringo, with horns and a fierce expression on her face, had caught Sito as she was sneaking around doing some mischief. Excuse me, this is an emergency. With that said, the old lady grabbed Takuma by the collar and casually strolled out of the representative's office. Nah, Nanny. This isn't what it looks like. You've got the wrong idea, I swear. Takuma's excuses were in vain, and the old woman walked silently and gracefully, gliding towards the teleportation gate in the waiting room. Their destination was the administrative department used by the old woman. Nah, Nanny. Without saying a word, the old woman had the confused Takuma stand facing a wall and stood behind him. Sorry to keep you waiting. The moment the room was enveloped in the secret wall, Takuma was shocked and turned around to say something to the old woman, but she grabbed him by the shoulders with incredible strength and turned him to face her. Takuma couldn't move at all with both of his arms tightly gripped in her hands. I have a bad feeling about this. Although the old woman sometimes behaved in a slightly outlandish way towards Takuma, she was usually calm and reserved. However, she had acted forcefully like this a few times before. All of them were. It's been a while, Takuma. You've grown so beautiful. All of those cases were related to King Magioku. The person shown on the monitor was Jayakirin, the current King Magioku herself. Takuma immediately tried to kneel, but the old woman still had a hold on his shoulders, so he couldn't move. It was disrespectful to stand in front of the king. Hey, old woman. Oh, I don't mind. She spoke in a friendly manner, but in contrast, even through the monitor, her smile was intimidating. Those who became kings of Magioku were different. Even Takuma, who belonged to the privileged class, seemed somewhat strange to the general public. The kings of Magioku, who were at the top of the hierarchy, were even more so. Even through a monitor, facing them was mentally exhausting. That is why he wanted to kneel and avoid her gaze. I had heard the rumors though. The rumor was that Jayakirin, who was previously surrounded by raw, malevolent aura, was now able to control it. But I'm not kidding. If you met her face to face, you could see that her true nature remained unchanged. In fact, the malevolence contained within her had grown to a level that was incomparable to what it was before. Takuma, please meet with Masaki Kuriko-sama. The moment she said that, Reisepshi gave permission to use the teleport gate. In other words, he had to go immediately. But I'm counting on you. I understand, Masue-sama. The old woman bowed respectfully, and Takuma was released from her grip. As soon as the call was cut off, Takuma, mentally exhausted, collapsed on the spot, drenched in sweat. Well then, Takuma-sama, we will be leaving immediately. Wait a minute. I know it's urgent, but at least let me get changed. But this suits you so well. As your nanny, it's my biggest mistake in life that I failed to notice that you feel this way on the inside. No. It's a misunderstanding. It seemed that the nightmare that Takuma had been afraid of had become reality. He desperately tried to explain himself, but he knew it was no use. But he still had to do something this time. This was just a prank by my sisters. Ho, it's fine. Leave it all to me. Listen. Please. Ho. The old woman, who was completely deaf to reason, demonstrated her competence and made an appointment to meet Kariko upon arriving at reception via the transfer gate a few minutes later, and with Jayakiran's prior arrangements, he was able to meet with Kariko a few minutes after that. Of course, he had fixed his smudged makeup. Seina's unused mansion in Kamidake's residential district was currently being used as Kariko's office and guest house. Takuma and the old woman were led to the largest meeting room there. It had been less than an hour since they had communicated with Jayakiran. That's why it's different. This is, while waiting for Kariko to arrive, Takuma tried to persuade the old woman. Although the other party already had 2 ladies in waiting, the future looked bleak at this rate. Ho ho ho. It's like banging your head against the wall. That's how conversations with the old woman always went. Lately, he'd started to think that this was just another twisted characteristic of Magyoku, that she was just being spiteful. But I'm sure Takuma-sama said that he was interested in Yamada Seina-sama, right? Sorry to keep you waiting, huh? Kariko entered the room at the worst possible time and froze when she heard the old woman's words and saw Takuma's face, now dressed as a woman. The old woman had said the worst possible words at the worst possible time. Oh no, she looks confused, ugh. The moment he looked into Kariko's eyes, Takuma realized what Kariko's true nature was, and why the witch Queen Jayakiran had learned to control herself over there. Oh, I might be dead. I see, that's how it is. Kariko said with a gentle smile. It was hard to believe that this was the same person as before. Yes, I'm sorry for causing so many misunderstandings. Anyway, Takuma got down on his knees and pleaded with Kariko. It was just a prank. Even if it meant exposing the scandal of the old woman's jumping to conclusions and assumptions, and his sister's pranks, and incurring their wrath, and at worst making them his enemy, it was far better than making an enemy of Kariko, who harbored the same kind of malevolence as the Witch Queen. In the first place, it was the old woman who forced me to come here in this outfit, so I guess I'll just have to ask her to bear with it. But more than that, this is a rare opportunity, so it's no good just meeting and introducing myself. Since I'm acting as an intermediary for Masue, the king of Magyoku, this meeting needs to have some value. Having escaped the initial crisis, Takuma's thoughts finally began to clear with relief. Let me order the tea. Kariko signaled to the lady-in-waiting to give Takuma some time to think. Well, what should I do? To be honest, I'm not Mahakuten, and given our family's nature, I don't think they'll just hand over the leadership so easily. Magyoku was an absolute dog-eat-dog world. To begin with, Jayakiran, Masue herself, was not the eldest child, yet she held the position of queen. Takuma was only known by rumor, and he didn't know the details, but it was said that the kings of Mahaku had always ascended to the throne after surviving brutal struggles. There's a possibility that I'll be kicked out of reception with nothing but the clothes on my back. Oh well, I guess I won't be able to take it easy after all. He turned his attention to the old woman standing behind him. She looks awfully happy. It was likely that she was reacting to Kariko's ferocious aura. It felt as though the emotions she usually kept bottled up deep in her heart were starting to leak out. Oh no. In the end, this old woman is just like the person at the top of Mahaku, Masue-sama. In short, the old lady's outlandish behavior was intentional, and she was just enjoying Takuma's reaction. Maybe it was a setup when she made me attend this meeting. So, what was her intention in bringing me here, anyway? Regardless of what the old lady's intentions were, let's start afresh. When Takuma finished his tea, he prepared himself. Masaki Kariko-sama, it's an honor to meet you. My name is Mahaka Takuma, and I am the candidate for Commander-in-Chief of Mahakuten. Takuma stood and bowed deeply. I am delighted to have this opportunity. Although extraterritoriality applies here, this conference is unofficial, so according to reception custom, it is acceptable. Kariko paused, then returned to her normal tone. Thank you. Takuma gave a small bow and sat down. Honestly, this is all so sudden and confusing. However, as the princess said, I feel that this is a rare opportunity. I understand your feelings. Those who have been involved with my husband, Yamada Seina, have experienced the same thing many times. In fact, that's how we met. I think we need to exchange information so that we can have a correct understanding of each other. In other words, it was confirmation of the balance of power between the two parties. Yamada Sena, whom Kuriko wanted to protect, was the owner of a godly knight, which was considered precious in Renza. Many people flocked to the godly knights and plotted to use them for their own purposes. However, if Takuma was right, the godly knights were both precious and cursed objects that brought terrible disasters. Yes, Kuriko nodded in agreement. Without a doubt, the company that had the biggest conflict of interest with Kuriko and her group in Renza was the armored cavalry manufacturer that Takuma belonged to. They were trying to find the distance between the two. Honestly, the people of Renza, myself included, are ignorant about the Galactic Federation. I imagine the Galactic Federation side is the same, given how isolated we are from each other, but at least the princess here has some understanding. If the data about the Galactic Federation's outline and census is publicly available over there, it can be viewed within Reception. Kuriko instantly displayed a rough comparison of Renza's data in front of Takuma. I see. At the moment, Renza's controlled space was roughly half the size of the Galactic Federation, and its economy was less than a third of that of the Federation. What was even more serious was the speed of economic development of the Galactic Federation. If these figures are to be believed, it became clear how pirate suppression was promoting economic development in that region, and why Hakuren and the others kidnapped Sena. In fact, Renza had conducted simulations of what would happen if there were no pirate attacks, and Takuma had discussed this with his friends at school. The figures they calculated at that time were certainly very close to the data shown here, although the scale was different. In other words, the longer it takes, the greater the power gap will become, and in some cases, if the Galactic Federation had any spare capacity, it would be possible for them to defeat our pirates from the other side. If that happens, they will have complete control. Takuma desperately tried to suppress his emotional turmoil. Princess, you obtained a brain tree unit in a duel. I believe it is called the Royal Tree in your area. What do you plan to do with it? It was the opening of a conversation, but it got to the heart of the matter. All units have already been deactivated for protection. I thought so. Takuma was taken aback by her straightforward answer. He had expected it, but the shock of being confronted with reality was surprisingly large. If that's the case, then manufacturer maintenance would be unnecessary, and I understand why you would refuse to return it, but wouldn't that be an obstacle to your objective? Such an act would completely antagonize the forces controlling Renza. Excuse me. At that moment, there was a light knock as Sauren came in and whispered something to Kuriko. Yes, I understand. I'm sorry, but I have an urgent matter to attend to, so I will have to leave for a bit. Kuriko said this, and after making sure Takuma nodded, she left the room. It might be different if this was a formal meeting, but for an unscheduled meeting, it was common for them to have to leave the room like this. Since the other person was in a higher position, he had no complaints. Also, it seemed like Sauren would stay behind to talk to him, so it would be a good chance for the tense Takuma to take a breather. It's been a long time, Mrs. Mahakuten, Mahaka Takuma, Sama. Sauren moved a stool that was placed against the wall and sat next to Takuma, then bowed. He seemed confused as to how to respond to Takuma in drag. My sisters were just having fun, and I was brought here after a series of events. Is that so? Sauren glanced at the old woman for an answer, but she just smiled silently and seemed relieved by his response. So not saying anything was on purpose after all. As Takuma thought this and gave the old woman a cold look, she suddenly stood up. Now that the greetings are over, I will be taking my leave. Nanny? But we're still in the middle of our conversation. Takuma-sama, it would be best if you continued your conversation with the princess. Oh, I see. Now that he had confirmed that Kuriko had picked a fight with Sant-en, the manufacturer of armored cavalry, he, as the acting representative of Mahakuten, had no reason to engage in any further discussions. The negotiations had already broken down. So, can I stay here? Takuma-sama has already been expelled from Mahakuten. Your personal assets and belongings have already been collected and placed in storage on Reception, so please rest assured. Really? Now? Takuma hadn't expected he would be able to take over Mahakuten. He expected that he would be put through some kind of test. But he never expected to be exiled in such a situation. I think this is the best possible situation, don't you? But if that was your intention from the beginning, you should have let me get changed before coming here. You must find it amusing, right? Ho ho ho, this is a place where hobbyists gather, so it's fine. Take care. The smiling old woman left Takuma stunned. Could this be the way the children of Magyoku are given their independence? Sauren quietly said out to Takuma, who looked on in shock. Yes, that's probably what happened. I guess they thought it was time to throw me out because of the criticism I made at the representative council. Well, it's better than being thrown out in the middle of nowhere. If he was unlucky, he could have ended up being thrown onto some uncharted planet and become like the lion who throws his cubs into the valley. I see. But the only problem was that he was thrown into this situation dressed as a woman, which was rather awkward for a man. However, it was fortunate, perhaps, that he was so beautiful that no one would think he was a man. People who didn't know him wouldn't have any problems. Of course, that excluded the psychological damage to the person himself. Well, my personal belongings are already in reception. Takuma operated the terminal to check something and then slumped his shoulders in disappointment. Is there a problem? I just inquired about it. My personal assets and belongings are being inspected, and I can't access them for 2 days. What? The luggage is one thing, but your personal assets seem strange. Should I inquire about this? No. It's probably the old woman's doing. I'll have to stay like this for a while. Well, at least I have an idea. We have uniforms here, if you'd like. As Sauren spoke, Kiriko came in. Soren quickly stood up and returned the stool to its original position. Sorry to keep you waiting. Now, let's continue our conversation. Well, actually, Soren looked at the person next to Takuma. Yes, I have received the report, so don't worry. Now we can talk without hesitation. After Kiriko spoke, the lady-in-waiting began to brew a new cup of tea. To put him in a better mood, this time she served some sweet snacks, perhaps to put him at ease. However, as I have been kicked out of Mahakuten at this time, it will be difficult for me to meet your expectations. I didn't have any hopes for the old-fashioned Sanen to begin with. What's needed is something much further down the line. Further down the line? Long story short, he quickly revealed the information Santen wanted and kicked the old woman out. Considering what happened in the Galactic Federation and what's happened here, the barriers between us and the Renza Federation may disappear in the near future. If that is the case, we would like to have someone who can understand our side of the story as much as possible. That kind of future is possible, but to be honest, I'm not sure it's in the near future. I understand how you feel. That's what everyone over there felt. But the fact that I'm here now and that the maintainers have appeared is a reality. No matter how absurd it may seem, we have seen it up close and personal, and most of the pirate guilds in the Galactic Federation have been wiped out. Indeed, I've heard that. Masue-sama and others came here with you in anticipation of that. Though their methods were a bit aggressive. Then why not narrow the search for Yamada Sana-sama? Making Santen their enemy was, in a way, the same as making Renza their enemy. Still, there are some things I can't give up. It was a resolute attitude. His expression exuded an iron will. An inalienable reason for breaking away from Santen, huh? Takuma glanced over at the spot where the old woman had been standing a moment ago. So he revealed that information so easily in order to send the old woman home. Although Takuma understood the meaning of the conversation from earlier, he felt a little uneasy about what he was about to hear. However, when he looked back at Kiriko, his resolve was strengthened by the calm expression on her face as she looked at him. I appreciate your concern for my husband. However, I hate to say it, but this kind of trouble is normal for him. Kiriko chuckled and breathed a big sigh. Always. I can tell you from experience that, even if it seems like a roundabout way, this is the shortest route. This is worse than I thought. Kiriko's expression and words caused a huge spike on the graph on the screen, and even Takuma was forced to acknowledge that the flow of history was accelerating rapidly. If that's the case, then there's no way I'm just going to run away after coming all the way here. First, may I ask you the reason for your breakup with Santen? Yeah, this has a lot to do with your brain tree. Kariko smiled, nodded slightly, and began to speak. To us on Jurai, the imperial trees are important friends. You could even say they are family. Does that mean we can assume that the higher generation brain trees have a clear will? This is what Takuma wanted to know the most. There were many secrets about the 5 sacred machines. In fact, the brain tree itself was top secret. My ancestors were immigrants to Jurai, so the imperial tree was the original inhabitant of Jurai, so to speak. The original inhabitants. If they are intelligent life forms, then yes, that would be the case, hee. And it wasn't just any intelligent life form. Kariko looked to the side and turned on the monitor. This is Tsunami-sama, the ancestor of all royal trees. This is huge. Images of Jurai were displayed one after another on the monitor, and Takuma was overwhelmed by their grandeur. The 10-kilometer-tall tree known as Tenju is, in a sense, the shell of Tsunami-sama. It is the largest tree that has been confirmed in the Galaxy Federation, and our capital city is currently built on it. Is it an empty shell? Sorry, but I don't understand. Tsunami-sama is what you would call a high-dimensional life form. While she was sleeping on planet Jurai, her body turned into a tree, which then grew to a gigantic size, becoming Tenju. The story goes that it was a sort of biological defense to regulate the planet's environment, but it apparently grew to this size in the hundreds of millions of years it took for it to meet our ancestors and awaken. After that, her consciousness was separated from her, and we inherited and used the remaining tree-like body. Well, then it's just like the creation of the world. That's true. In reality, she was a being called one of the top gods, but Kariko couldn't reveal that here. But the story so far had given him a good idea of her power. We have observed some phenomena here that may have been caused by higher dimensional life forms, but their very existence is still present in Jurai. Is that still the case? I don't know where she is or what she is doing, but it seems that 3-dimensional time and space, and even the laws of physics, have no meaning to her. It's almost like she's a god. Does that mean she's also the ancestor of the brain tree? That's right. Haven't you seen the battle between the godly knights? That wasn't a battle where the godly knights were fighting at their full power. If the first generation unleashes all the power they can, the space within the galaxy region will be easily wiped out. That's that bad. If you use the brain tree, surely you can make some predictions? With each generation, its power weakens. So, what about the other way around? Even the first generation had that much power. So when it comes to the founder, I don't think a small-minded person can do anything about it based on their own selfish ideas. But, aren't you also using the royal trees as a weapon? We're not using it. I said family, right? The royal trees are just protecting us and themselves. So it's not something you control? Hee. It seems that our ancestors, the first people who entered Jurai, became friends with Tsunami-sama when they met her. So, friends, huh? It's not surprising that you're surprised. However, in present-day Jurai, due to an agreement with Tsunami-sama, the royal trees of Jurai must choose a partner from among the royal family of Jurai. This is, of course, to protect the family, but my husband's case is irregular. He met Zianvi-sama, who was asleep on a certain planet, by chance and became its partner. You may already know the story, as I have been interviewed by Recepshi. So that means your family. It's a strange feeling. It feels quite different from common sense here. The lesser trees you use cannot express their will clearly. However, that doesn't mean they have no will at all. I have certainly heard such reports, but the manufacturers have dismissed them as the occult or urban legends. Well, I can understand that it's more convenient that way. Jurai does something similar, although they do it after carefully assessing their opponent. Excuse me, but why are the higher-ranked trees managed by Jurai? If they have a will of their own, shouldn't they be allowed to do as they please? Although they have high combat abilities, those kids are far more intelligent than humans. I think this is hard to imagine unless you've actually experienced it, but those kids are adorable. Kariko's expression was as if she was looking at a puppy or kitten, unable to contain her tickling ability. They're adorable? It makes me feel guilty about making them fight. That's why I'm protecting them. The reality is that even here, there are many who only want power from those children. It sounds like you want to monopolize their power, doesn't it? He knew it was rude to ask, but he still needed to ask even if it upset her. I don't intend to deny that, and it's reasonable to think that way. However, it is those children's will that they want the current situation to continue. Does that mean the royal tree has made a clear and public statement of its intentions? It would be easier if they were assertive children. I described them as cute, right? We've had many people come into contact with those children in the past, but when they wanted to use their powers, they ended up using force to get them. That's why we're the ones taking the brunt of it. That's going to be hard for them to understand. In that sense, our dueling system is convenient and fine. Takuma felt a chill of awe down his spine as Kariko smiled. This may sound like sophistry to you, but if we limit the number of partners to only the royal family and avoid outflow, it will be like sowing the seeds of chaos. Even if it is a tree of the lowest rank, such as one of your 5 holy machines, surely you can understand a little better. I understand what you mean. Santen currently has a monopoly on that technology. In return, the imperial family's ships accept various restrictions and surveillance over their actions. When a partner imperial family member dies, the imperial family tree will become a gravestone of its own volition, take root in the earth, and lose its power. So it's only for use by one generation. If they are willing to go to such lengths to protect it, I can understand why they call it family. Takuma sighed and frowned. Now the real questions began. So, just to confirm, is it true that you removed the protection from the Braintree unit? Of course. So I know what Sanen did to those kids. Kariko looked at Takuma with a blank look on her face. Her expressionless face, like a no mask, was so terrifying that Takuma's whole body froze, and he couldn't move or even breathe. However, Kariko quickly closed her eyes, and Takuma was finally able to take a deep breath. But the same can be said about the Galactic Federation. There are many who fear those children's power and see them as nothing more than weapons. So, as Jirai, what do you intend to do with Santen? Nothing. They're your family, aren't they? I was angry at first, but I soon came to understand how those kids felt. Understand. After all, many of the children we've acquired have developed feelings for their knights. Affection for the knights, you say? It is true that many of the knights feel something special about the armored cavalry's brain tree. Some even believe that if they can communicate with it, they can unleash power beyond their normal capabilities. However, the knights remain in control, and the brain tree is simply a system of the armored cavalry. If they feel affection for a knight, those children will try to act in accordance with their wishes. That's probably what makes the slightest difference. But that's only true for the lower-ranked children you're dealing with, right? What you must keep in mind is that the higher-ranked children have strong bonds with their partners and will not hesitate to use their powers against anyone who harms them or their partners. That's a chilling thought. But if they have intelligence and family bonds, that's how it would be, I suppose. Still, Takuma realized how dangerous it was that Renza took their common sense for granted, but he had no proof that what Kariko was saying was true. An easy example would be, during the duel, the actions of Kamadake, the other ship belonging to my husband, who cut through the mysterious organization's armored cavalry. That child has a mind of her own and is truly devoted to her husband, so she forgot herself and rushed out to save him in his time of crisis. That's it? I'm sure they said it was a combined part. Even if it was really a part, it cut through an armored cavalry that was on par with the 5 holy machines. That alone made it unusual, and it would be better if they said it was a royal ship instead. Let me assure you, this does not violate our dueling laws. That's the logic that's being used by the pirates. Indeed, so that ship is also from the Imperial Tree? Kamadake is not a royal tree. And the same goes for my sacred machine, the godly knight Imatsu Ukumi. What? It's not a royal tree. The mysterious organization's armored cavalry was on par with the 5 holy machines, and the armored cavalry of the princes who dueled Kariko were the highest-ranking manufacturers. If the thing that overwhelmed them had no connection to the royal trees, it would be a major incident. The Galactic Federation has a research school organization on the scale of a planetary system called the Galaxy Academy. It was made by one of the most outstanding scientists and philosophers there. As you would expect, the technology to make Godly Knights-class machines is not publicly available, and it's not something that can be mass-produced. Is that so? Takuma began to think about sorting out the information. So, even without the brain tree, they have the technological capability to develop a Godly Knight? I don't know if that's true or a bluff, but the Princess Yamatsu Ukami definitely had the power to be called a Godly Knight, and when the ship called Kamade cut through a 5 sacred machine class, the energy output was incredible. Either way, it's dangerous to underestimate their scientific capabilities. For better or worse, the technology for the armored cavalry was monopolized by Santen, and there was almost no competition between companies. And, because the armored cavalry were the symbol of Renza, the center of scientific development was mainly related to the armored cavalry. That's right, it's distorted. That's why it's possible that development is lagging behind. Kariko smiled and patiently waited for Takuma to think. In the first place, Takuma looked up. What exactly is a philosopher? Normally, there aren't many scientists who have the skills to work in multiple fields. Can I assume that they're the ones who oversee a large number of staff? Philosophers combine technology from multiple fields, create new ways to use it, and are in charge of the ethics of its use. That's why philosophers are allowed to see all the data being researched at the Galaxy Academy. Since the Galaxy Academy is the highest-ranking academic institution in the Federation, the data stored there includes all of the data of the Galaxy Federation, including companies and individuals. Such authority? Not in a published paper. How could you do such a thing? Of course, even philosophers are not all-powerful. Each has their own area of expertise, and some even have thousands of staff members under their control. But the philosopher who created the Kamade and the Yamatsu Ukami is a monster who has lived for 20,000 years and conducts research and development on her own. What the is that for real? Who is that person? Renza also has life extension technology, but even so, it was only for 1,000 years. If you're interested, a detailed overview and history of the Galaxy Academy is available for public viewing, so I recommend you take a look. Kariko gave Takuma access to various data related to the Galaxy Academy. This was in-depth data that was only available to a very small percentage of the Academy, including company leaders and experts. I see. So, you want to create a company within Renza that can compete with Santen and revitalize it. Takuma glanced over the surface data and understood Kariko's intentions. It was also related to the timing of him being kicked out of Mahakuten. Old hag. If things go well, she's planning to outdo the other two. That sounds interesting, but I wonder if it will go according to her plan. Well, whether or not she seizes this opportunity, the rest was up to Takuma's will. That sounds pretty interesting, doesn't it? Takuma decided to take Kariko's hand. Well, let's leave it at that for today. I'm sure you also have a lot of things to get in order. Huh? Yes. At that moment, Takuma remembered that he was cross-dressing. There's no need to rush. Let's calm down first. Kariko nodded in satisfaction.